There are legends about lost valleys in America, strange places that have never been seen, untouched for all human history. This is one of those places. It has been called the strangest 75 square miles in North America. At least one early traveler thought he had encountered hell. Today, many people think it looks like the surface of the moon, but it's not. This is Craters of the Moon National Monument in central Idaho. What caused this unusual terrain to form? Only 2,000 years ago, craters of the moon looked like this. Today, craters is quiet, but hot magma, molten rock, will return to the surface here. That's because the park sits near what geologists call a hotspot. It's a place where magma from the Earth's core literally burns its way up to the surface. Every 2,000 years or so, it makes another appearance here. Geologist Bill Hackett.
One of the fundamental questions of volcanology is why do we get these diverse landforms? Basically, it depends on how much gas is dissolved in the magma and how pasty it is.
If the magma is filled with gas, it comes out frothy, and the result is a cinder cone. There are a number here at Craters. Lava with less gas becomes more fluid and may just gush out of the earth, forming a river of molten rock. But if the lava has no gas, it becomes thick and pasty, eventually piling up to form a spatter cone. Helping to bring this lava to the surface here is a huge series of cracks in the earth that cross this part of Idaho. It is here that the Earth's surface is literally being pulled apart. Park interpreter David Clark.
Those cracks provide an area where the magma can move up to the surface. And there are several of these cracks that extend across the Snake River Plain and are known as rifts. One of the largest, most extensive one is the Great Rift, which is part of what's being preserved at Craters of the Moon.
The boundaries of Craters of the Moon include just a portion of the expansive lava flows that have spilled out of the Great Rift. Still, most of the dramatic volcanic features are concentrated within the borders of Craters of the Moon. Of the 25 volcanoes here, the best known are the spatter cones. They're renowned as the most perfect formation of this type on the Earth. But these mini volcanoes, only 50 to 70 feet high, are dwarfed by the much larger cinder cones nearby. The largest, Big Cinder, rises over 700 feet above the plain. These cones are, in essence, just a pile of small black rocks. A close-up view reveals the gas pockets that make these rocks so light. Many of the cones are riddled with these blobs of hardened lava called volcanic bombs. They were ejected from the cinder cones as molten lava during a violent eruption and hardened as they fell to earth. They remain here, untouched, thousands of years later. In some cases, an entire side of a cinder cone is missing. This may be the result of a later explosion, or may occur when lava simply wells up and forms a lake within the volcano's vent. The weight of this lava pushes out against the crater wall, breaking it away. These blocks of crater wall can be rafted quite a distance from the original volcano. While the volcanoes are perhaps the most spectacular sights here, most of the area is covered with vast lava flows. Two types of lava flows exist here. Pahoehoe, a name borrowed from the Hawaiians, refers to these ropey-looking lavas. When they were hot, Pahoehoe flows moved at high speed. Now, of course, these hardened streams of melted rock are frozen in time. The top of these Pahoehoe flows often cooled first, while the still molten lava underneath drained away from the hardening roof. The result? a lava tube, or cave, was formed.
The whole area is riddled with lava tubes. In fact, some of the longest lava tubes in the geologic record are out on the Snake River Plain.
Many of these caves are accessible to visitors. The most popular are here at the Indian Tunnel area. The other type of lava flows here are called ah-ah. Also Hawaiian, the name refers to the sound the islanders made when trying to walk across these sharp lava formations. These jagged clinkers form during the slow movement of this thick, cooling lava. As fast-moving pohoihoi flows cool, they slow down and become ah-ah flows. Then quite abruptly, the flow of lava just stops. Over time, an enormous amount of lava has flowed out of the ground here, 1,000 square miles, enough melted rock to cover all of the Los Angeles area. In fact, much of east central Idaho is covered with this jagged lava rock. Just north of Craters of the Moon are the Pioneer Mountains. Geologists tell us they're millions of years old, quite a contrast to the lavas of craters, which began to form only about 15,000 years ago. But craters didn't form all at once. Things would get fiery for up to a few hundred years and then quiet down for a couple of thousand years. This cycle continued through 8 eruptive periods. As a result, some of the lava here is very old, while other flows are quite young. The most recent volcanic activity ended about 100 BC. The next eruptions are due any time now.
It wouldn't pose any hazard based on its previous record of activity, except for maybe the installations right in the monument. You know, the visitor center might get some ash on the roof sort of thing, but it wouldn't blow up entire cities, and it wouldn't affect nearby towns or anything like that.
To this day, much of Craters remains unexplored. Indians largely avoided the area, and the Oregon Trail skirted around the north edge of the lavas. The first person to really explore the area was this man, Robert Limbert.
Robert Limbert was probably kind of the last of his kind. I guess you could call him a true adventurer, that he made his livelihood through doing things that were exciting and unique.
In May of 1920, Limbert and W.L. Cole set out to cross the Great Rift and Craters of the Moon on foot, an 80-mile trek that no one had done before.
He started out across that without the help of maps or knowing if there were water supplies or knowing how rough it was going to be or anything else. And it was a rough trip, a very rough trip.
At one point, Limbert's compass malfunctioned, a potentially life-threatening problem. Later, he got stuck in a crater. But eventually, Limbert figured a way out of these predicaments, only to face his biggest problem. He was out of water. Gradually, his thirst grew. Then, luckily, Limbert spotted a few doves and ingeniously followed them to one of the rare water holes in the area. 17 days after the trip began, tired, weak, he made it to the northern boundary of the lavas. The trek was so treacherous, everyone in the nearby town of Arco turned out to celebrate. Throughout the journey, Limbert had taken photographs, and in 1924 they were published along with his account of the trip in National Geographic magazine. The article was instrumental in establishing the area as a national monument in 1924. At that time, a number of different names were considered, but Craters of the Moon was the one that stuck.
And that was back in the 20s when we didn't really know what a close-up look of the moon really was. The moon is mainly, the craters there are mainly meteor impact craters. There is some volcanic activity on the moon, but most of it's covered in meteor dust. So they're really very distinctly different.
Limbert's promotion of Craters of the Moon didn't end with the National Geographic article. He set up a tour company which took people on excursions into craters throughout the 1920s. His crude drawings were the only maps of the area for many years. On one of his last trips into the lavas, Limbert found an unusual oasis of water and trees he dubbed the Lost Valley. Exploration by modern-day scientists indicates this was probably just one of several places in the lavas where water is temporarily trapped on the surface by an underlying layer of ice.
He was kind of, I don't know, kind of a lot like Indiana Jones. He just went from one adventure to the other, only I think he, in his own way, he wanted to share that with the American people too, all these fascinating things that he was finding in Idaho. And he was really quite an incredible person.
Water. It is available at the campground area faucets and a few rare water holes, but Craters is one of the driest places in America, or so it would seem. This is Lake Erie, one of the largest repositories of fresh water on the Earth. What does this lake have in common with the Craters of the Moon area? There is roughly the same amount of water here as there is here. It's just that at Craters of the Moon, the water is all underground. The lava is so porous that water just drains right through. Then it begins an incredible journey, dripping and flowing underground for 100 years, until finally, 80 miles away, it literally gushes out of the lava rock, here at the Thousand Springs area. This huge storehouse of underground water is called the Snake River Plain Aquifer, and it is critical to Idaho's agriculture. Without this abundant source of water, Idaho's famous potatoes would not grow. Equally important to the potato crop is the volcanic ash in Idaho's unique soil, ash created by the same forces that made the Craters of the Moon. Perhaps the biggest misconception about Craters is that it's lifeless. Quite the contrary. There is a diverse mixture of plant life here. Just getting a foothold in this rocky terrain is difficult. Yet wherever a small crack opens up and soil accumulates, desert plants will take root. Botanist Carl Holte.
Plants tend to be where they can tolerate the conditions rather than where they prefer. So those plants that are there probably would do better somewhere else, but that's where they can compete.
After fresh lava cools, plant life gets a foothold almost immediately. Lichens soon attach themselves to rock faces and begin the slow process of breaking down the lava rock into soil. Herbs like the dwarf buckwheat also populate the new lava flows. When enough soil accumulates, the limber pines take hold. Limber pines are the only tree that can grow on these rough young flows. As saplings, they resemble most any pine, but years of struggling to survive in this harsh environment takes its toll. Still, the limber pine plays a critical role in the succession of plant life here. That's because the fallen needles of these trees decompose and form new soil. This soil helps a whole new generation of plants, like the rubber rabbit brush, get started. But even this new group of plants lives here only temporarily. Over time, they pave the way for the ultimate tenet of the high desert, sagebrush. Eventually, the sagebrush takes over entirely, choking out the bitterbrush and limber pines and everything else. It will dominate the lava flow from now on. Thousands of years after the lava has cooled, a mature sagebrush grassland has been formed.
Plants are in all different kinds of stages of succession because the lava flows would wipe out an area of plants and start from scratch again, And then because we had several eruptions over a fairly long span of time, there's just about every span you can time represented.
Grassy Cone, one of the oldest volcanoes in the area, is a good example of how sagebrush eventually dominates the landscape. The Douglas fir here also indicates that growing conditions have changed substantially. This slow transition from bare lava to mature sagebrush grassland takes thousands of years. So by looking at the type of plant life on a particular cone, scientists can roughly estimate its age. Younger cones are nearly barren. Older cones are covered with sagebrush and occasionally Douglas fir. Yet it's a wonder anything grows here at all, considering the extremes of the climate at Craters of the Moon.
Because it's a harsh environment, very little water in the summer and very hot, and then in the winter the harsh temperatures, high winds at times of the year, that the plants are really all have to be adapted for a high desert environment.
One plant that's adapted quite well is the dwarf buckwheat. They grow all over the cinder cones at craters, and they seem to be quite evenly spaced. That's because their roots spread out up to 3 feet in diameter to gather water more effectively. But the adaptations are even more ingenious than just expanded root systems.
The plants aren't really bright green for the most part, they're gray. And the reason that they're gray is that the leaves and the stems are covered with hairs. These hairs, when the sunlight hits the hair, it converts to heat. And the leaf underneath those hairs remains cool.
And notice how all the leaves on this plant radiate from the center. That way, any rain that does fall here will be funneled towards the center of the plant where it is needed most. The flowers here have adapted in a very different way. Notice that they are exceptionally brightly colored. It's no accident. Desert flowers need those bright colors to attract pollinators. Because these flowering plants are so far apart and the terrain so rugged, the flowers, like this blazing star, must put on a show to get the attention of the pollinators or die. But not all plants want to attract insects. The tansy bush needs to repel the insects that might eat its leaves, and so it creates an oil that acts as a natural insect repellent when discharged from these fern-like leaves. A number of different animals populate craters, but the best studied are the mule deer. Because of the lack of water and vegetation, the herd often migrates into 2 distinctly different areas of the park to better utilize the scarce resources. It's a unique migratory pattern not found anywhere else.
You have animals which are found in many different locations, but behaviorally they're able to survive the very harsh conditions at craters by adapting what they do instead of what they are.
But perhaps the most scientifically significant biology at Craters of the Moon is located on these mounds called kapukas.
You can think of them as an island. That's an area that was higher than the surrounding area, and so when the lava flowed through, just like water flows through, it went around them instead and didn't flow over them because it was higher than the level of the surrounding areas.
The result is that the kapukas were cut off from outside influences. That's important to scientists because these are among the very few grasslands in America that have never been grazed. In essence, a kapuka is a window to the past, a chance to see what plants existed before the American West became rangeland.
There are some interesting comparisons that can be made between those islands that have been totally undisturbed and areas outside where we know we have influenced things. Sometimes it doesn't look like we influenced anything very much, but when you compare it to something that's never been touched, you can find some pretty major differences.
Even outside the kapukas, the plants at craters are almost totally undisturbed by man. Unfortunately, the limber pines are a notable exception. At first glance, most of the trees seem strong and healthy, but looking a little closer often reveals an unusual tuft of branches. It's caused by a parasite plant called dwarf mistletoe. This parasite can suck the life from a limber pine, weakening it to the point where it becomes vulnerable to disease. This is often the result. In the 1960s, the Park Service cut down many of the limber pines in an attempt to eradicate the parasite. However, the project was soon called off as park managers realized the mistletoe occurred naturally and shouldn't be interfered with.
And Paul Fritz, who is a very good environmentalist and good natural resources person, realized that this was pretty folly, but he was forced to do it as director of the monument. And so it wasn't the mistletoe that destroyed the trees, it was the mistletoe control program.
Still, the overall influence of man here has been minor. That's largely because much of the park's wilderness is difficult to get to. The main loop drive is accessible and well-traveled, but the rest of the park is very remote. No roads, no water, just lava. The wilderness area is one of the least explored areas in the monument.
There are probably many areas in the monument where man has never walked. People with today's techniques of backpacking and so on that do want to come out and explore off the beaten path, I think see things that they can identify as probably nobody else has seen them before.
Although it's easy to get to Craters, the park is off the beaten path. Arco, Idaho, 20 miles away, is the nearest city. It's the closest place to Craters that park visitors can get something to eat or fill up with gas. Still, Craters averages over 200,000 visitors each year. Some camp here overnight at the park's small campground, but most are content just to drive the loop road or perhaps walk along the short marked trails. Of course, providing access to that many people each year means some of the features here have become slightly eroded. Still, Craters is extremely well preserved, thanks largely to vigorous work by the National Park Service here. But these delicate features have not always been so well protected. For example, about 2 feet have been eroded off the tops of the spatter cones by curious visitors.
And in the last few years, the Park Service has put a lot of time and effort into a rehab project to try and bring these spatter cones back to what they were, eliminate some of the off-trail usage, and just better preserve these features.
The preservation efforts here have been successful. As a result, Craters of the Moon remains one of the most visually striking places on Earth. But unlike many of America's natural areas, Craters remains in a constant state of flux. For now, it's sleeping. But tomorrow, it might awaken.